Anniversary, we present In the Line of Fire, a tribute to Victoria's 80,000 volunteer and career firefighters.
Fire brigade.
All right, we've got a few things we need to fix up on this grant. We've got the power stern hoses are loose.
No worries.
Wait on, focus. Yeah, we've got a call. Edward?
I feel that I've got a sense of duty and commitment to the community that I live in.
Right, wrong road.
Southeastern Australia has always been one of the most fire-prone regions on Earth. At the height of a dry summer, when the sun burns fiercely and oven-like winds blow out of the baking deserts of the interior, any district can become an inferno. The cycle is repeated through the years. Wildfire driven by scorching winds, destroying men, women and children, cattle and sheep, crops and houses, anything that stands in its way. Many of the great fire days have simple names, usually after the day of the week on which they occurred. Black Friday, the 13th of January 1939, ranked with Black Thursday in 1851 as one of the most devastating fire days since European settlement.
Bush fire brigades attacked the flanks of the fires along the foothills and lower slopes of the mountain ranges. In other parts of the state, experienced firefighters in the big timber country waged a losing battle against overwhelming odds and fought in vain to save homes and townships. Soldiers in camp in Seymour were called upon to help fight the fire in the pine plantation at Bright.
71 people died on Black Friday. Travellers on the highways were trapped and perished. Whole townships were obliterated in a few minutes. More than 1.5 million hectares of state forest was razed. The magnitude of the disaster led to a royal commission. A succession of witnesses echoed the overwhelming sentiment that fighting fires seemed to be nobody's business. People simply flocked to a fire and pitched in, or if it didn't immediately threaten their property, they stayed away. The Royal Commission recommended a statewide fire authority with the power to proclaim periods of acute fire danger, but the report was largely ignored. It took another 59 deaths and public outrage after more fires in 1943 and 44 before the government was forced to act. Legislation establishing the Country Fire Authority was finally passed and the CFA began operations in 1945.
An active volunteer brigade is vital to local security. Efficiently trained local brigades, centrally coordinated in time of major bushfires, do magnificent work. Yes, even with what seems like primitive equipment.
The post-war years were a testing time for the new authority. On the 14th of January 1962, the Dandenong Ranges east of Melbourne were burning. There were 6 major fires and 12 smaller fires within a 40-kilometre semicircle of the hills. In 1939, casual firefighters would have been welcomed, but in 1962, they were turned away in droves. As residents were evacuated, the army was called in. In the aftermath, the CFA was criticised for alleged lack of coordination, both at the fire front and with police. Major fires raged again through 1965 and 68. But the biggest challenge was yet to come. The 16th of February 1983, the day that was Ash Wednesday. It came at the end of the 3rd abnormally hot summer in a row and after one of the driest years on record. Just 8 days earlier, Melbourne had been blanketed by a choking dust storm. Mid-afternoon abruptly turned to darkness as thousands of tons of mallee topsoil was dumped on the city. Many people only half-jokingly referred to it as being like the end of the world. What they didn't know was just over a week later, the same forces of nature would claim 75 lives across Victoria and South Australia. The most tragic of the Ash Wednesday fires began at Belgrave Heights. Believed to have been deliberately lit, it stretched along the southern slopes of the Dandenongs and left 21 people dead. A neighbouring fire at Cockatoo, also suspected as the work of an arsonist, claimed 6 lives and destroyed much of the township.
As the night moved on, the real horror of the fire developed. News had reached the operations building that people had died in the blaze. CFA volunteers returning from the outbreak told of the terror of seeing people burning in front of their eyes.
There's a roar of unbelievable roar, and it was panic that set in. You can't explain what happened there. It was just a wall of fire, 70, 80 foot high, travelling at 30 or 40 mile an hour, just engulfing everything that was in its path. And unfortunately, there were humans in this case.
You actually saw people running away from the flames?
Yes. Yeah. There were humans, but we're off to go now. We must go now. Thanks very much.
To the west, more than 600 homes were destroyed and 7 lives were lost as fire jumped the Calder Highway and raced into the Macedon Ranges. East of Warrnambool, 50,000 hectares of rich dairy farming country was burned. 9 people died, including 4 trapped in their car. A devastating fire that started near the Deansmarsh sawmill roared across the tinder-dry Otway Ranges to the coastal resort of Lorne.
All persons immediately evacuated and moved into the next place.
There were 3 deaths in this fire that was eventually caught by the wind change and pushed east along the Great Ocean Road, destroying almost everything in its path to beyond Anglesey. But the news that shocked everyone was the death of 15 volunteer firefighters. 12 died when their 2 trucks were circled by flames in St George's Road, Upper Beaconsfield. On the first Sunday after the fire, a service was held. The local Anglican church at Upper Beaconsfield had been burned away, so it was decided to hold the service in a public hall. The event was not widely publicised and only a few people were expected. But they came in their hundreds, saying very little. So many came that the hall was too small and they moved on to the tennis court. The cross from the church had survived, sagging but still intact.
But it was just one of the few remnants that we were able to recover from our burnt out church building.
It was used as a symbol that life was starting again. While most people remember the big wildfire days like Ash Wednesday, smaller localised blazes are soon forgotten, but not by those who fought them and live with the memories.
Well, we all copped it here. We all copped it here in the Longwood fire in '65. All this country out here was all burnt black, and we had very unfortunate our neighbours over the road here. We had a tragedy there. Yes, we've all worn it in one way or another. They only got a few metres from their front gate, and they bumped a tree. I didn't say they hit a tree hard, they just bumped it because they were driving in blinding smoke and flames. And they bumped the tree, and unfortunately the fire caught up with them, and we lost 7 people in that episode.
They're related to me, yes. There was a grandmother and auntie and cousins involved. And I live now in where the old house was. Every time I drive out the gate, quite often it's a bad day, you think of it.
Yeah. You get up in the morning and you stick your head out the window, you know what the day's going to be like, and come 11 or 12 o'clock you start getting a knot in the guts, and you think, well, here we are, here's another bad day that we could have to go anywhere. It might be on our own back doorstep, or it might be anywhere in the state. It's that sort of day. You know that it's going to happen.
Every day you get a similar day to the Longwood fire. It sends a cold chill down your back. And we're at the flank of the fire, and we could view it probably from the side. And it was horrifically frightening to see these huge corkscrews of fire and gas ballooning through the sky, and they'd get bigger, and all of a sudden they'd hit a huge mound of trees, and it would be just like a bomb going off. And that I will never forget.
One thing I find when we're going to other fires, being the Longwood tanker, it's well known because we've been in a support role to other regions throughout the state over the years, and the people that you meet that come up to you and say, oh, I met you at such and such a fire a few years ago. You know, welcome back, or thanks for coming and helping us. That gives us great satisfaction personally to get those things.
The Australian, he always tends to look after his fellow man, and he'll look after the battler, and I guess this is what you do. Your CFA is all about. You go out to help somebody else with their problems and try and overcome their problems.
This willingness to help others without question is almost a natural instinct for most of the CFA's rural volunteers. As young men growing up in the country, they all had first-hand experience of how deadly fire can be. But being a country firefighter isn't all serious. The job does have its lighter moments.
Oh yeah, but we're not allowed to talk about them, mate. We get the sack.
we had one I can remember. As there was a lady had a house in Longwood, and this is one we got called out to. Was a cat. Her cat was up the tree, and we were called to get this cat down out of the tree. And it was early hours of the morning. And when we got there, the lady, who was only dressed in a nightie, was up the tree already trying to get the cat, and it's very hard to try and get a cat out of a tree without looking up. So that was quite humorous, that one.
Back in Melbourne, many urban volunteers are just as committed as their rural counterparts, but for different reasons. Some are following family tradition, others are seeking excitement or serving out of a sense of duty.
I'll be honest with you, when Ash Wednesday started, I hadn't joined the fire brigade at that stage, and I sat at home and I got a inner tenseness that I felt that I had to get out and go and help these people in the community. It was mass chaos, as we all know, and I just felt totally useless sitting down at home. Myself sitting in the prime area that's, you know, that potentially the fires may have come through, not knowing, not being aware of what may happen, what was going to happen. So at that moment then, the next day I went down and volunteered my services to the authority, and I've never looked back.
I find that you need to put into the community. Every member of the community has to put back in. It's been a family tradition. My father, my brothers, myself have all been part of the CFA, and so I'm proud to be part of it.
Tanya Dimmick is a hairdresser operating her own business.
When they look at you, it's a bit of surprise, actually. They sort of think, oh gosh, and you actually fight fires? And I say, yes, that's right, we go out and fight fires. They sort of expect you to be more on the ladies' auxiliary, not on the male side of things. Yeah, it is social, very social, because you've got your Wednesday nights and we do a lot of outings during the year and have an annual dinner at the end of the year. So yeah, it's very good. It's a good way of meeting people and making new friends. It's great.
Dad's the captain and all my brothers have been through it as well, so sort of keep it in, family. Oh, it's just something different, like not everyone does it and that. It's just good fun too.
There's always an adrenaline rush, yeah, when you go to falls and that sort of thing, yeah.
I've got 3 boys coming up. My eldest boy's 12. He'll be joining the fire brigade. He's shown interest in joining the fire brigade. So we'll be father and son in the same fire service.
For many people, the fact that the CFA is overwhelmingly a volunteer organisation comes as something of a surprise. This is especially so on Melbourne's sprawling outer fringe, where most major residential and semi-industrial areas are protected by CFA units comprised entirely of volunteers.
The organisation is unique in that large complement of volunteer people, of the order of 80,000 people, and from very mixed, very diverse backgrounds.
Usually at the request of police and ambulance, the CFA attends accidents where people are trapped in vehicles or where there's fire or spillages of oil or chemicals.
Organisationally, equipment has been modernised and improved significantly. Protective clothing, protective equipment. Our expectation is now that people will attend fires well dressed, well equipped, well trained and well protected.
It's also an expectation that when needed, CFA volunteers will cross state borders, as they did to New South Wales in January 1994.
Almost 1,000 Victorian volunteers are now battling the wildfires. Backed by 85 vehicles, the strike teams are making an impact.
Victorian firefighters were pressed into service at Singleton, Gosford and Wyong. This ability to respond quickly and effectively is fundamental to the CFA's existence. Choosing how to respond is an area where new technology is giving firefighters more information, more options, and in theory, greater security. Since Ash Wednesday, a complete understanding of wind and how it affects fire has become absolutely essential. All but one of the 47 people who died in Victoria on that day died from injuries sustained shortly after the sudden and dramatic wind change.
Still about 1.1 metres per second. Yeah. About 323 degrees.
Spot on.
Yep.
This portable weather station can be erected near a fire by a team of 3 in just 30 minutes. It then becomes part of a network feeding real-time weather information to CFA headquarters.
Part of the job here is to get up-to-date weather information such as temperature, humidity, wind speed and wind direction.
Information from the weather stations is backed up by direct observations from aircraft. Back at the operations centre, all the information is fed into a computer where a fire plotting and modelling program predicts how the fire is likely to behave.
We can determine the spread of the fire, and by altering the wind direction, again which we can determine from our RAWS weather stations, we could plot the change of direction of the fire and the head, and it can also help us divert our resources to where we believe the fire needs to be cut off.
But one thing technology hasn't changed is people's attitudes to fire.
I think most people are guilty of having short memories. We talk about history never repeating, etc., but in actual fact history does repeat itself when it comes to fire, and people often forget the lessons learnt the last time.
Many people burnt out in the Dandenongs and Macedon Ranges over the years have moved on. The new settlers built on the same sites, using the same materials. As the bush grew back, so did the fire risk.
Typical death trap in the Dandenongs is a home that is poorly maintained, has guttering full of leaves, has flammable objects stored under the house like the fuel for the lawnmower, old boxes and newspapers, or even the wood stack piled against the house.
With so many people determined to live close to nature, despite the risk, the CFA has adjusted its priorities.
On the bad day, the attention has to be given to the fire front in the interests of saving more lives and more properties, rather than deploying appliances to individual homes and properties.
These days, the CFA's advice to homeowners who are able-bodied and confident is to prepare their home in advance. Then on the fire day, stay and fight. Once you've taken the necessary precautions, by being there, the chances of the house and yourself surviving are very good.